So we were coming to school and it was on Tuesday and it was really foggy and we were by Walmart and this guy, he was going really fast and he read a red light and he almost T-boned us, and I'm thankful that God was watching over us and that we didn't get hurt. So we were going to Midland for my brother's baseball game and we were right in Seminole, and there was this man that was going really fast and he T-boned us, and it was really scary at the time, but like my head almost hit the dashboard and stuff and we were all very, very sore, but we just want to thank God that he was protecting us.
Hey JCA, are you pumped up? We are pumped up. Whew. Oh yeah, I'm excited for today. It's Power Up today, and I know that God has something for you today. We've been talking about the 7 C's of creation. And of course, Miss Krill talked about creation last week, and she talked about all the things that were made, and she showed you some really cool things. Miss Krill always has the best illustrations, doesn't she? I think y'all should give it up for Miss Krill. She's the best. Y'all take a second and just go nuts for Miss Krill. Ooh, Miss Krill is awesome. Well, today I want to talk to you about corruption. Now, this is a story that's found in Genesis chapter 3, and it's a true story, and it's how sin entered the world. In Genesis chapter 3, we know that God made Adam and Eve, and we know that he made them in their image. We also know that God loved Adam and Eve, and he walked with them every single day in the garden. Can you imagine? Take a second and just think about they got to see God every single day. He walked with them every single day. That's so incredible to me. It's so incredible that God actually walked in the garden and everything was perfect. And God made everything in the garden. He told Adam and Eve, he said, you can eat of any tree in the garden but one. Any tree in the garden but one. Again, this is found in Genesis chapter 3. And so one day they're walking and they're in the garden and they're doing everything that they're doing, and they're doing what God is telling them to do. And it's in this moment that they find something. They go near the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And they're by the tree, and guess what? The serpent showed up, right? And he began to ask something of Eve. Did God really say that you can eat of any tree in the garden? And he asked the question. Didn't God say you could have any tree? Couldn't you eat from anything? And that's how the devil likes to start. He likes to start with temptation. First of all, I want to point out a few things to you before we keep talking about corruption and how sin entered into the world. When we are in our life, the rest of our lives, there's going to be things that try and come in to tempt us to do the wrong thing. And it may be, talking back to your mom and dad. It may be disobeying your mom and dad, which we're going to find out about disobedience and the first sin and all that stuff in just a minute. But I want to let you know that just because you're tempted doesn't mean you can't get out of it. Temptation means that something is put in front of you that you know is wrong, and there's this small desire, there's something in you that says, I need to do that, even though I know I shouldn't do that. It's a temptation. It's a desire, and it's something that's put in front of you. And Adam and Eve were walking by the tree. Now, the closer you get to things you're not supposed to have, sometimes that temptation can get stronger. I like to say, and this is going to be a big word, and we'll talk about it, but I like to say when the proximity or our closeness to something gets bigger, so does the temptation. So they were walking by the tree, and the serpent came and he tempted Eve. And he said, did God not say that you could eat of any tree in the garden? And Eve tells the serpent exactly what the right answer was. She said, no, God said we can have any tree. We can eat of any tree but one. This one. Right here, I can't have this one. For on the day that we eat this one, our eyes will be open and we will surely die. Or if we eat of the tree, we'll surely die, like it says in Genesis chapter 3. And in that moment, the serpent says, God you will not surely die. So he's telling her that God is lying to her. He says to her, you won't surely die. For God knows on the day that you eat of this tree, you will become like him, and your eyes will be open, and you'll see. And don't you want to see? And so the Bible says that as she looked at the fruit, saw that it was pleasurable, it looked good. It was a good looking fruit. It looked tasty. And the Bible actually says that it was pleasurable. It looked awesome for her to have. And it also, she knew that it was gonna give her something. And when she saw that it was also good for food, she took of the tree, ate of its fruit, and then turned and gave it to her husband, Adam. And Adam ate of the fruit also. And then their eyes were open. And the Bible says that they realized that they didn't have any clothes. And so they were naked and afraid. And they went and hid themselves. And they made fig leaves to cover themselves up. Now, at this point, you're thinking, oh my goodness, how can these people do this? But sometimes we forget that we too are tempted every single day. And sometimes we make the right decision and sometimes we don't. But Adam and Eve chose to disobey God. And this was the very first sin. Now, that evening, God did what he always did. And he came to walk with them in the garden. But when he came to the garden, he couldn't find them. Even though we all know that God knew exactly where they were at. Because even when we think that we can hide our sin from God, and even when we think that we can cover ourselves up with fig leaves, even when we think that we can actually hide from God, God knows where we are. But he's so good, because even in that moment, he didn't show up and go and tell them how terrible they were. Even though he knew exactly where they are. You know what he did? He asked a question. He said, Adam and Eve, where are you? Because God will always give you an opportunity to come to him with our sin issues. He'll always give you an opportunity to come and say, man, I messed up. And so Adam and Eve, they come out and they say, we were hiding because we were naked. And God said something so important. He said, who told you that? Have you eaten from the tree which I have commanded you not to eat? And Adam says, it was Eve. She did it. I think there's something important about taking responsibility for our actions. But we'll get to that a little later. That's a message for another day. So Adam says, it was that woman that you gave me, God. And Eve said, it was the serpent. He made me do it. See, there's a common thread when it comes to sin and corruption in our lives. We always want to put the blame on somebody else for our actions. But when it comes down to it, it was our actions. So God looks at the serpent and he curses the serpent and he curses the woman and he curses the man, because sin will put a curse on your life. It wasn't God. It was the consequences of their actions that cursed the land. It cursed Adam and Eve. It cursed the serpent. And so God looks at them and he says to the serpent that I'll put enmity, which means there will be problems between you and man, and you will bruise man's heel and he will bruise your head and you'll crawl on your belly. And so we know that the orientation, that so let me think of a better word here, that the shape and however the serpent was made changed at this point in time when he deceived Adam and Eve, which means he just got them to do something that they shouldn't do through lying to them. He deceived them. That's another word for that would be manipulating. He manipulated them into doing something that they knew they shouldn't do. And then he looked at woman and he said, your childbearing will be much harder. And then he looked at the man and he said, the ground will not produce fruit for you the way I designed it to. You will work and it'll be in the sweat of your brow, which means when you have to work really hard, it's going to be really hard for you to get the ground to produce. And so everything was cursed because of sin. And the very first sin that we know takes place was disobedience. And things were cursed. Now, the whole rest of the story, y'all know it. And we're going to talk about it in the other 7 C's, and we'll get there, and we'll talk about all the different things. But we know ultimately when Jesus came, he came to undo what Adam and Eve did and pay the price so that we could get back into relationship with God. And that's so cool. But I think it's really important for us to take a look at the fact that corruption came into the earth, and all of us are born sinners because of Adam and Eve, because of their disobedience. And so I want to remind you that our sin, our actions, it actually affects more than just myself. Did you see? Eve chose to eat, and then she chose to give it to Adam. And when that happened, their eyes were opened. It was right there in that moment. You notice the Bible doesn't say that their eyes were opened when Eve ate, because man had the opportunity. Adam had the choice to say no and go to God, but he didn't have what it took to do that. So he just gave in to temptation. And because of that, it affected every human for the rest of humanity until Jesus. And we're all still born in sin, but we have a way to get out of sin and to get out of that curse. We have a way to do that. And so I just want to encourage you today, because at JCA, we say some things, don't we? We know that the very first sin is disobedience. And we ask something all the time. How do we obey? Right away, all the way, the happy way. And that is so cool, and it's so important. No matter what it is, no matter who it is, when you have an authority, maybe it's your teacher, maybe it's your babysitter who's watching you one night, maybe it's your mom and dad. When they ask you to do something, how do we obey? Well, we obey the happy way. I'm sorry, I messed that up. We do obey the happy way, but that's the way it is. We obey right away. Instant obedience is what we need to do. We need to do it right away. We don't need to wait. We don't need to be like, oh, just let me finish this game on Fortnite real quick, or let me do this real quick. Let me do this. No, when someone who is our authority asks us to do something, we want to do it right away. Right away. The second thing that we want to do is we want to do it all the way, which means I don't want to just kind of do what I was told to do. Like, I don't want to, here's an example that I think will help you, that someone needs to hear this. A young man who is just like me needs to hear that you didn't take the trash, you didn't obey all the way if you take the trash out, but you don't put a trash bag back in the trash can. Like, come on, that's just part of what you're supposed to do when you take the trash out, right? So we want to obey immediately, right away, as soon as we're asked. And then we want to do everything we were asked to do. We don't want to just partially do it, because if we just kind of do it and we don't do everything, then we didn't do what we were told to do. And thirdly, our attitude matters. When we obey, it's important that we have a good attitude. We do it the happy way. I'm not going to go kicking and screaming and why you have to ask me to take the trash out? I'm in the middle of something and my brother's over there and you never asked my brother to do blah, 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 blah. No, have a good attitude. Okay? And lastly, there's one last thing I want to tell you. It's important how we obey. And we know that sin entered the world because of disobedience. That was the very first sin. And corruption and the curse came, and all those things that we've talked about. And as we go through these 7 C's, we're going to hear about redemption. We're going to hear about what Jesus did to pay the price to make us perfect again so that we could come into communion. But I want to tell you that your obedience to God matters. But you can never obey your way into perfection, which means you can't work for relationship with God thinking that you can do good enough to be back in God's presence. That's not the case. We had to have Jesus, and Jesus paid the price for us, and he died and he gave his life. And because we know that the wages of sin is death, that's what the Bible tells us. God actually, on that day that Adam and Eve sinned, he killed animals to cover the price of sin for Adam and Eve. And then he gave them the skins as clothing. And we know that something dies when we sin. And Jesus took that for us. The requirement of sin is justice. Justice is important. But God paid the price by sending Jesus. So no, you can never work for God's love. You can never work for God's presence. You would never be good enough. I would never be good enough on my own, but Jesus. So that's corruption. Sin enters the world. And this is how the story begins. Adam and Eve screwed things up, but Jesus came and made a way. And we're going to talk more about this, but I want you to remember, obedience is important, but relationship with Jesus is the most important thing. And the more we spend time with Jesus, the better we'll do what our Father in heaven asks us to do and our authority here on earth, because authority on earth is important, and how we obey that matters to God. So obey right away, all the way, the happy way, and know that as you get closer to God, He's going to help you do that. It's going to be great. You'll have a great day.